In this video, we will start Chapter 7 and begin by enabling the Django Messages framework within our project. And so starting off with every new chapter, make sure you go ahead and create a Chapter 7 app within your project. And that can be done by right-clicking the Becoming a Django Ent Dev folder, going to Add, and selecting Django App, and typing in lowercase letters chapter_7. And when doing so, go to your settings.py file and add the path to your Chapter 7 app that you just created. And in the apps.py file that exists for Chapter 7, go ahead and modify the name variable to equal the path where your Chapter 7 folder exists. And to enable the Django Messages framework in the same installed apps that we're working with here in our settings.py file, we need to add the Django Contrib Sessions app. And I added that to a compilation of 3 different lists here, the first being Django apps. And so the Django Contrib Sessions, this is sometimes added to a project when you first load Django. If it's not there at this time, please go ahead and add that. As well, we'll need the Django Contrib Messages library as well. And in this same file, we need to add an entry to our middleware list. 2 entries actually. The session middleware that comes from the Django Contrib Sessions middleware library, and the message middleware class that also comes from the Django Contrib Messages middleware library. And we will need to add a context processor to our templates, that being the Django Contrib Messages context processors library, and we're bringing in messages. And we also need a message storage. And that is down here. We're setting it to use a session storage that comes from Django Contrib Messages Storage Session Library. There are other choices to choose from, such as fallback storage, base storage, and cookie storage has limited support for now, but is deprecated, and you should avoid using that. And the next one we're going to discuss is message levels. And for this, we need to add an import. From Django Contrib Messages, we're going to import constants and use that as messages. So that if we're going to write a conditional if debug is true, we're going to set the message level a little bit lower than what it is by default, so that we could pick up and read any debug level messages. If debug is not true, then we're going to pass. We're going to leave message level its default, which is a value of 20, and that is an info level message or higher. So success, warning, and error would all, as well as info, would all be displayed. Now we can display debug level messages. Now in doing this, we can also modify our message tags, and this is a word representation that's often used as a class name for CSS when rendering different message levels. This way you could use class names to style different CSS styles onto that message. So that way they could be either different colors, different fonts, different font sizes, whatever you would like it to be. So the default message tag for info would be info, but if we wanted to change that to information or something else, we could put it in here. And we can also create our own custom message levels and message tags. So here I am going above and beyond the values that exist by default, which is debug info success warning and error. Those have values of 10, 20, 25, 30, and 40. So in this example, I am creating minor, major, and critical value of 50, 60, and 70. Now this is just for educational purposes. Now if I go ahead and I create those message levels, I can add them to the message tags here and then give the CSS representation of that message tag. And that concludes enabling the messages framework within our project. In the next video, we will go over actually creating a message and displaying them. In this video, we will be creating and then displaying messages using the Django Messages framework into a form within our browser. And prior to starting this chapter, when we were preparing for this chapter, we should have gone into chapter 5 and copied the views, forms, and fields files from that app and copied them into our chapter 7 folder, and then updating any reference to chapter 5 to now say chapter 7, such as chapter _7 and chapter -7. The same applies to any of the static files and template files that are found in chapter 5. Bring all of them into your chapter 7 app and update any reference from chapter 5 to chapter 7. That way we can use the exact same structure of everything that we've created previously and just add on to it to demonstrate this new concept. So beginning now with this video, this task of creating a message in our chapter 7 views.py file, in the form class view that should already exist, we're going to work on the post method and add to the conditional statement that checks if the form is valid a add messages statement. Now there's two ways that we can add a message, and one of them is with the add message method that you see here, coming from the messages library that we imported from django.contrib. And the other method I'll run through and I'll explain next. But here we would define, pass in the request, add and specify the level as message.successLevel, and it would be a level 40, I believe. no, success level is 25. And then the custom message that we want to display is your contact form submitted successfully. And under the creating a message section of chapter 7 in the book, we do discuss extra tags, which we're actually using as CSS classes. These could be used in numerous different ways, but to demonstrate how they can be used within this book and this project, we're using them as CSS classes. And then fail silently we're going to set as true. Meaning if we wanted to keep this code here and somebody didn't actually run through enabling the Django messages framework within a project, this statement won't actually throw an error. We'll just fail silently and continue on with the rest of the code, which is a very nice feature to have. Now next, don't forget to make sure you still have your context. This should have been written earlier in chapter 5. Now in the else condition of our conditional statement, if the form is not valid, we're going to use the add message method again to specify an error level message, and that is level 40, level 40. And again, we're going to tell it to fail silently. And this time we're not going to give it any extra tags. But those are optional. You don't actually have to write those. And again, for this one, make sure that you have the context that we provided and written earlier in chapter 5. Now, the alternative way to write both of these, since we're using built-in Django message levels, we could write message.success instead of using the add message method. Here it would do the same thing. We don't have to actually specify the message level at this point because this automatically implies it is message success. And then we give it the custom name that we want, or the label that we want for that message. On the else condition, it would be messages.error is the alternative to using the add message. Now, if we were using a custom message level, such as the critical level that we created here, and then registered in our tags, with a level of 70, then, then we can only use the add message method in order to use that critical message level statement. And here we are telling the label to be, this is a critical message. We'll leave these commented out for now. Once we run our application, we can run through and adjust these to demonstrate the different ones. Now, before we can actually do that, we have to go into our chapter 7 form class.html file. Now, this is a template file that, in all of these template files, by the way, you should have copied from chapter 5 into your chapter 7 folder. That way, your form class.html file should already exist, and everything that you see here should already exist as we've created earlier in chapter 5. So the one thing we're going to add into here is this conditional statement that checks to see if messages exists. If it does, then we want to create a list object, and that being this UL object here. And for every message in messages, we're going to create an li list item. And if message tags exists, we want to create a class attribute, and in it we want to print all of the message tags. Now this will separate them with a space, so you don't have to worry about adding logic to do that. Then as the actual label for that list item, the text I should say, that's going to just be message, and we could use a vertical pipe and the safe filter if we wanted to come in here and add HTML to our message, as we're doing here with the error message. Now go ahead and make sure that your project is running, and also go and make sure in our main urls.py file, whoops, it's this one, that we have enabled our chapter 7 URLs by including this import include statement to bring in our chapter 7 urls.py file. Now it's inside that file that we copied all of the URL patterns that we previously worked with and created in chapter 5, and updated all of our reference from chapter 5 to chapter 7, as you see here. So once you have all of that enabled and you are still running, go ahead and make sure your project is running. I see the chapter 7 home page. I'm going to navigate to the chapter 7 form class URL at this time. Now everything should be filled out when I first come to this page, because earlier in chapter 5 we enabled it to initialize the field with pre-formatted data, and that data is to satisfy successful submit. So when I hit the send message button, I'll see the success message that we created: your contact form submitted successfully. That's because I am taking the context of the message and printing it to the screen. So simply using a statement like this doesn't always take on all of the work of using the messages within the Django messages framework. You have to then do something with that information, and here I'm printing it to the screen, but you could potentially create log files, or you could create an entire page, say a messages view page, where then you detailed out times and messages and message levels and all that fun jazz for when you're working with messages. Now if we wanted to demonstrate an error, I'm going to modify email 1, because that one I know is going to run the post method, meaning that it's going to send this form to the server to then validate. Whereas if I removed this, I wouldn't be able to even submit the form. So now I'm going to send the message, and I found errors found. This actually comes from our validator that we wrote previously in chapter 5. However, here we can see the message that we created. There was a problem submitting your contact form. Please review the highlighted fields below. We know that that was this message that we created here. Now, if I wanted to work with the critical message, the custom message level that we created. Now I'm adding this to the form as valid condition, by the way. So here I'm going to add a .com, make this a valid email format now. It may not be an actual valid email, by the way, but it's an email format. I'm going to send the message. Settings is not defined. By default, I have that commented out in the code of this book. Please make sure you have imported the settings object into your project, or else you may run into the same issue. Now here we see that our contact form submitted successfully, and it's critical. It's critical that it's submitted. So we know that our custom message level that we wrote here is successful. Now if we wanted to test the alternative to writing a success message then using the add message method, let's go ahead and uncomment the message success, and here I'm just going to add the number 2, and here I'm going to add the number 1. Now without even refreshing this page, I'm just going to hit this send message button again, and bada boom bada bing. Now if we wanted to demonstrate this on the error message, let's go ahead and uncomment out the message.error version, and I'm going to do the same thing. Add a 2 and add a 1. And here I'm going to make this an invalid email format and then submit the form. And now I see 1 and 2. And that concludes creating and then displaying a Django message. In this video, we'll be discussing a Mailtrap account that we're going to use to capture emails from within our system when we're using it locally, and begin by configuring our first email notification as a simple plain text email for the very first time. Now, prior to beginning this chapter, you should have created a Mailtrap account by going to mailtrap.io and clicking sign up. And from there, you'll be able to, you probably have to verify your email. And once you log in, you'll be able to go to my inbox and select SMTP settings, and from the drop down select Django, and from there you'll be able to get the information it provides to fill in the email host, host user, host password, and port number, and you'll want to put those in your settings.py file as you see here. And also I am wrapping this in a conditional that checks to see if debug is true. That way, if I'm in production, I don't have to use a particular email host, this Mailtrap account as the email host. I could use an actual email host. And since we are using the os.getEnv function here, you would want to put these in your local.env file. An example env has been provided with the code of this book, where again you would just put the information as you see here. Now, configuring a email notification, we're going to focus on a plain text email first, and then next we'll get into a HTML or a rich text email, or even a combination of both of them. So earlier you should have copied a lot of files from the Chapter 5 app into your Chapter 7 app. That was discussed in a previous video. Go ahead and open up your Chapter 7 forms.py file. Here we're going to work in our contact form. And within that contact form we're going to create a new method. And that method is going to be called send email. This could be named anything you would like. For simplicity, I I called it send email. This doesn't have to stick to a certain naming convention as some other features of Django demand. Here I'm going to access the data, and that is self.cleaned data, as I'm bringing in self and the request method, request object. For this particular example, we're going to set message body to equal just hello world as a simple string. This information is not required at this time. And then email will equal email message. Now this is a class that we're importing from the Django core mail library, and we're just going to use the email class to have Django structure our email object for us. It does a lot of the heavy lifting. Here all we have to do is specify what do we want the subject to be, what do we want the body to be, the from email, the reply to email. We could CC or BC people on this, and they could be multiple people separated by a comma. We're going to send it to, and again this could be multiple people separated by a comma. We could add attachments directly in here, and we can add additional headers. But for simplicity's sake, we're not going to focus on any of that at this time. And here we'll want to set email.content subtype to plain, and then we'll send. And we can also fail silently, a feature that we previously learned with the Django messages framework. Email notifications also can be failed silently. Now moving on to our chapter 7 views.py file. Again, this form class view should have already been copied over from chapter 5. That way all we're doing is adding to it in this chapter our messages, and then what we're going to add here is a send email. So we're going to go form.sendEmail, and that's the method that we just created in that contact form class. And we need to pass in the request since we are also accessing the request within this method. Now, making sure that our project is running, we go in our browser to the chapter 7 form class URL. Again, that URL structure should have already been created in a previous video. Here it gets pre-populated with the initial data that we've set previously in chapter 5, so that all we're doing is focusing on submitting the form and looking at the email that gets sent. So we see the success messages that we left off in a previous video of this chapter. And moving on to our inbox, we can see that a few seconds ago our plain text, not HTML, email was sent with the hello world text. And that concludes working with plain text emails within Django. In this video, we are going to continue working with email notifications. This time we're going to send an HTML formatted email. And so in our chapter 7 forms.py file, in the same contact form class under the send email method that we created earlier. Let's go ahead and change message body to now include bold tags within the text. This way we can check and see if HTML is actually getting rendered within the email. The next thing we need to do is change the email content subtype. So we scroll down, we see that we previously left off at plain text email. Let's change this to an HTML or a rich text format email. Now, making sure that your project is still running, go ahead back to your browser, and on the Chapter 7 form class page, I'll just I clicked in there and hit enter to reload it or revisit it fresh. I'm going to send the message. See that we still get the same success messages that we left off with in a previous video of this chapter. And going back to our Mailtrap account, we could see that a few seconds ago we received a new email. This time, the last one was a plain text. These two tabs were not highlighted. However, this time these two tabs are highlighted. We could view the source. We see the bold tags that we've included, and no longer is text version available. So in this case, it's either one or the other. And that concludes sending an HTML formatted email. We can see that it was really not that different from what we did before. In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off with an HTML email. This time we want to activate both the HTML tab and the text tab. We want both plain text alternative. So moving back to our Chapter 7 forms.py file, in the same contact form class and send email method that we created before, let's go ahead and we need to import the email multi-alternatives class from the Django core mail library. Now here in our send email method, let's leave the message body as is with the bold tags around hello world. The email, we're going to, in the code of the book, I'm just going to comment this out and uncomment the version with email multi-alternatives. Here we're leaving it pretty much the same, except the class that we're using to construct it is different. Now for the content subtype, we're going to leave that the same as HTML, and we're going to use the email attach alternative method and specify hello world as the text and the type text plain. Now here we can't just write plain, we have to actually append the text /. So some minor variances. And then we leave email send the same. Now what we could do is make sure that our project is running. Go back to our browser. I'm going to load this page fresh. And now submit the form. And going back to our Mailtrap account, in our index we see a few seconds ago we got a new email. In the last one, the text tab was not highlighted. Now both the HTML and the text tab are highlighted. We could see our text version is just hello world. The source for our HTML version is hello world with the bold tags that we see here. And that concludes working with HTML emails and plain text alternatives. In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off on sending HTML emails with plain text alternative. This time we're going to attach files to our emails. Now, working in our Chapter 7 forms.py file, in the same contact form class and the same send email method, let's go ahead and leave everything the same, except we're going to add email.attach file with settings.static root plus Chapter 7 PDF example PDF. Now make sure that you are importing from Django Conf your settings at the top of this document, and email send will remain the same. Also, from the code of the book, make sure you copy the Chapter 7 static Chapter 7 PDF example PDF file that you see here, or you can go ahead and create a blank file that is called example PDF within that folder, just so that we can see what's going on. And when doing so, let's go ahead and in our console window hit Control-C to break out of that operation, which is running our project at this time. And let's type in Python manage.py. And yours might be Python 3. I have an alias for my system. And collect static. Now this is going to prompt you either yes or no. Type in yes. That's fine. Disregard the fav icons. And it seems I've already ran this prior to running this video, but just make sure that you have done so, because we will need to run this in order for Mailtrap to be able to point to the file that we're looking for. And go ahead and run your project again using the run server command. See that it's running successfully, and now we can go to the back to our Chapter 7 form class URL. I'm just going to hit enter and visit this page fresh and click the send message button. We see our standard success messages that we left off in a previous video. And a few seconds ago in our Mailtrap account, we got a new email. This time we see the same plain text alternative and HTML email that we left off also in a previous video. Except this time, the thing that we don't see in the last email is up in the right hand corner in attachments. There was none at that point. Now we see a clickable attachments with the number 1. And clicking on that, it then tells us if we had more. Each of the items that are attached, this is just a single PDF of 60 kilobits. And let's go ahead and click into that. Here we see that it's actually a mailtrap.io account, so that's one of the reasons why we needed to run the collect static, because then Mailtrap has to grab a file and take that file and load it into its system and its server. And here I just preloaded an image of the PDF, standard PDF logo itself into that file. That way we know what it is. Now that concludes sending an email with file attachment. In this video, we're going to begin using a HTML template file to store the content of the email that we actually want to send. And one of the benefits to doing this is that you could technically break up work and delegate that amongst different developers. You could even break it up into a more granular front end versus back end type of way of divvying up work. And even if you didn't want to use it in that kind of way, it's still a very nice way of organizing and managing your actual emails and knowing that, okay, this is where the code lives if I'm looking for any of the code related to a particular email. And so one of the ways that we do that is we're going to no longer use the string format for our message body. Instead, we're going to use our template.render, and where we're getting template is by using the get template method, and we're specifying the path relative to the templates folder within any of your apps in your project. And so in the chapter 7 folder, there's an email folder, and that is where I'm putting the plain text format.html file. And where this get template function is actually coming from is from the Django.template.loader library, and that's a function, a method that's provided by Django itself. And so if we open up this plain text format.html file, we can see that I put in here just simple text that says hello world, and I've appended the -I in plain text onto it so that when we do send it, we'll know that it's different from our example that we're using here. And so again, for the message body, use template.render, and that's a function that's provided by Django as well. We want to continue to make sure that we're using the email message class, because in this particular instance we're sending a plain text email, and so this is where we're using the content type, the content subtype of plain, and then we're just going to send the email. So making sure that your project is running, go ahead to your browser and navigate to the chapter 7 form class URL and submit the form, and we can see that it was sent successfully, or at least the message says so. And then going back to our Mailtrap account, we can see the message did appear just now. It is in plain text format with HTML disabled. Looking at the technical info, it is a plain text format. And that just demonstrates that the text that is being inserted into the body of the email is actually coming from this file. And that is how you use a template file to structure your emails. In this video, we'll continue to work with Django templates to send an email. And this time we're going to structure an HTML formatted email using those templates. And so where we defined our template variable, let's go ahead and no longer use the plain text format file, and instead we're going to use the HTML format file. And this file has been provided with the code of the book in the Chapter 7 emails folder called HTML format.html. And here you're going to structure the actual code for an email, including the doc type, the HTML tag, the head tag, and the body tag. And here I just put a simple bold statement with hello world, and I appended the HTML test template on the end so that we know that this text is coming from this file. And so back in the same contact form class that we've been working with, in the send to email method, we're going to use the same template.render function for the message body, and we'll continue to use the same email message class to structure the email. And here we're going to remove the plain text email content subtype and instead use the HTML content subtype. So now we can make sure that our project is running and go to our browser and try to submit the form on the same Chapter 7 form class page. And here we can see that I got a successful message in return, and a few seconds ago we did receive the hello world with the HTML test template text that we provided. And that is how you use the Django templating system to send an HTML email. In this video, we're going to continue where we left off in using the Django templating system to create HTML formatted emails. And in the same contact form class and the same send email method that we've been working in, let's comment out the HTML format file that we used for the template variable, and instead use the new contact form entry.html file. And this is how we're going to bring our context into the file. And in order to do that, for just a basic example, we're going to define our context using the data that we are accessing here. And so that same query set we're going to now be able to use within the template file. And in order for that to work, for the message body, we'll still use the same template.render function that you see here, except we're going to pass in the context within that render function, just like this. And then everything else will remain the same. The email that we're formatting will continue to use the same email message class, and the content subtype will continue to be HTML. However, if you wanted to pass in context using a plain text formatted email, you could still do it the same way. And then going into that file itself, the new contact form entry.html file, that is provided with the code of the book in the Chapter 7 emails templates folder. And so inside here, it's going to be structured pretty much the same as before. We're going to keep using the doc type tag, the HTML, the head, and the body tags. And it's inside the body where we're going to structure the text that we want to display, using the data that we provided as context. So you can see here that all I'm doing is providing the value of each field that exists within the form that we've created, so that I could see that being displayed within the email. And then to help make make sense of that data, I'm putting a label in front of it as well. And this is just a hard-coded label. This could also be dynamically driven through context as well. And then if you wanted to, I've also provided this example, which technically isn't doing anything at this time within this code. But if you wanted to use template tags, you would use load statements just the same as any other template file within within your Django project. So here I'm bringing in the static, and I've brought in an example from a previous chapter, the class name template tag. I put that in my own chapter 7.py file. That's found right here under the template tags folder, chapter 7.py. Again, this is not being used, but if we did want to use it, that's how we would bring it in. And then now we can go ahead and make sure our project is running, and it is. And then we'll go ahead and submit this form. And here we got our success message. And so moving into Mailtrap, we can see that a few seconds ago we did get a new contact form, and it is providing the data that we expect it to per how we formatted it within that file. And that is how you pass context into an email that's using a template. And again, that could work in a plain text email as well. In this video, we're going to use the same form class view URL page that we've been using to trigger an action that creates a PDF document for us. And by doing that, we are going to use a package called XHTML to PDF, and make sure that's included in your requirements.txt file, or you've installed it using the pip install command. And there's a lot of documentation about how to use this package at their official read the docs page. And a very important section would be this defining page layouts, where it goes in pretty good detail about how you could structure your actual pages within your PDF document. And so a lot of this is what you're about to see in the template that we're going to create. Using the same form class view, we're going to work in the same post method. So just under where we've been triggering how our emails are being sent, we're going to trigger another action called generate PDF, and that's this custom method that we've created here. So within the same contact form, we're going to work with that generate PDF method. And it works pretty similar to how we've been working with the emails, where we have to define a template, and here we're using a standard HTML file. So just like how Django uses every other template file within your project, a PDF will work the same way. And then we're specifying the destination for where this is going to be produced. And so this does differ. It's not going to be your chapter 7 static folder where your app actually lives within your project. This will get generated into your static files folder. So here we're going to monitor what gets put in the chapter 7 PDF folder of this folder. And then we specify what the data is. This is actually going to be in the next example. But what we do have to do is we're using this template.render, which is pretty similar to what we did with our send emails. It works pretty much the same way. But instead of using the email class that we've been using, we are going to import this PISA library, and that comes from the XHTML to PDF package. So make sure you've included this import statement at the top of your document or within the method itself. And then we pass in the HTML that we've rendered and specified the destination. And if you look at the documentation, there are more parameters that you could specify. And then we're returning just a simple HTTP response with an error if an error exists. And so let's go ahead and make sure that your project is running. And then here we can navigate to the same Chapter 7 form class that we've been using for all of the email examples. And we'll fire off and submit this form and see that we did get the success message. And if we go back to our Solution Explorer and look at the Chapter 7 PDF folder within the static files folder, we can see that it did create a test PDF. If you view it within Visual Studio itself, you'll get nothing but gibberish. And here we can right click to open with and choose Adobe Acrobat Reader. So here we have the actual email. I mean PDF, the actual PDF. But if we look at where that template was created, our Chapter 7 PDFs folder, that comes from our Chapter 7 app. Within that templates folder, there's a Chapter 7 PDFs folder, and that's where PDF templates.html file lives. And it's within here that I have the structure of the PDF document. I have a doc type, an HTML tag, a head tag, and a body tag. Here I'm defining some CSS styles, and where these frames come in are found in the documentation from that third-party package. So you would have to go to the read the docs to understand what these are doing. And then here I have just some lorem ipsum being generated. So 50 paragraphs worth of random gibberish, basically. And this will be explained in the next video. But we could see back at our actual PDF document that that's where some of this text was generated, and then everything below it is the random Latin that was generated. And we do have page numbers that are added into the footer and a custom header that's provided. That's where the footer object right here and the header object right here are created. And again, that is explained in detail within the documentation itself for how you would actually work with those kinds of objects, specifically the PDF page number and the PDF page count objects. And there are other objects that you can use as well, allowing you to have a little bit more control over the structure of your PDF document. You can include images, you can embed them within the header, the footer, or the body, so it doesn't matter where, but just be careful because there are boundaries that you are restricted to, but some of that can be modified. And that is how you create a PDF document. In this video, we're going to use the same generate PDF method that we created in the previous video to inject custom context within the PDF document that we're creating. So this is where most of us would want to use this feature to basically create dynamic documents on the fly. And so in the same generate PDF method, we are going to use the same template and the same destination. Actually, we're going to specify a new file name for this and call it just test_2. But what we are going to do is add this data and context. So data is exactly how we were getting our data from the send email method, except we're repurposing it for use within our PDF. And so we're passing it into the context also in the same way. And so when we come to the template.render function, that will also be used in the same way to send that context into the template. And then everything else after that will remain the same. Going into our PDF template.html file, we do access the template using these data tags the same exact way that we did within our emails. So it feels almost like you're creating an email right now, except the product is a PDF document. And so go ahead and make sure that your project is running, and then navigate to your Chapter 7 form class page and submit this form. We can see that it was submitted successfully, and if we look at our static files under our Chapter 7 folder, we do see that the test2.pdf document was created. And so I'm going to go ahead and open that up with Adobe Acrobat Reader and see now in this example this list has actual values printed instead of blank space like it was before. And those come from the values that are provided within the form itself, right here. And so that is how you pass context into a dynamically generated PDF document.